Yeah, I finally finished these guards. Um, I have the camera on a wide angle setting so you can see them because I've got the other car in the garage at the moment. Um, but they came out pretty well. I did most of the work on this side yesterday and then started on this one, but hadn't. I'd made the panel but hadn't bolted it in place. And I came out here this morning thinking, oh, that won't take too long. And that was about 9 or 10 hours ago. So I've just finished. What I found was even though you think you've got the panel fitting really well, when you actually start bolting it up, you start finding problems. And one of the issues I had was the line along here was about a quarter of an inch away from the body. So I ended up having to re-bend just that line. You sort of end up sort of shifting the fold over. It's hard to explain. It's quite fiddly to do as well. But I managed to do that to get this all to fit quite well. This is all a bit battered at the moment. It'll need a bit of smoothing out, but it's not too bad. The front corner pieces, I ended up just cutting those off because they were just flapping around all over the place. I got it all to fit without them, and then I made up these little triangular pieces, which has a flange down one side. And that's all you need. Just having that flange there makes that completely rigid, and that fills in those corners there. Move the boot lid. In the end, the fillet panel's bolted to the guard with a row of 8 bolts, and then to the body there are 4 bolts along here, and then I had to leave a gap because it's right where this tube is. And then there's, I'm not sure if we'll be able to see them, there's 4 more bolts at the top there. Those red things underneath the heads of the bolts are actually fiber washers. They're actually plumbing washers, but I didn't have enough to do all of them. So once the lockdown's lifted, I'll have to get some more. But those 4 bolts there at the top hold it really firmly. And of course there's the two on the front of the guard as well. So basically today was spent putting these on, taking them off, putting them on, taking them off countless times. I think I've spent about 10 hours doing that, maybe more. And I was doing it the same way every time, which was to put the front bolts in first. And it wasn't until right near the end that I realized that was stupid. And the easiest way to assemble them is to put the 4 in at the top first, pull them in, and then just pull everything else into place. And I had to drill the holes in the front slightly oversized so it would line up, but that worked really well. The 4 bolts at the bottom here, you can actually get to both sides of it, so there's just a nut and a bolt. But these 4 in the top, of course, are really hard to get to. So I welded nuts onto the flange on the inside of here to make captive nuts so that you only have to get the screws in from the inside. Even doing that's hard enough. The gaps aren't too bad. They're not perfect. But what's going to happen is all those gaps get filled up. And you can get different things to use to fill it up. I think the original Austin stuff is actually vinyl type stuff. I'm not sure. Obviously at the moment it's really hard to get anything. These are just some little bits and pieces I had left around. This stuff's plastic and it does look cheap and plasticky, so I'm not going to be using that. But it comes in different sorts of shapes. This is obviously a lot smaller. What I probably will use, because I can get it locally and it's quite good stuff, is this rubber channel stuff. The good thing with this is you can cheat and you can cut one of those legs off if you've got a thinner gap you want to fill, and just leave the bead on the top, and that's about a 6mm bead. So that'll go in between all these joins. At the moment, obviously everything's bolted up tight, but that'll go in there and fill those gaps. So yeah, they're definitely strong. If I can bounce up and down on that, and all it does is moves the car. The guards don't move at all. I wasn't sure if 4 bolts along the bottom were going to be enough, but yeah, easily enough. And then of course the the front guards are also going to bolt to the front of those, which will help make the fronts really stiff as well. So yeah, it was an awful lot of work, but I think it's come out okay in the end. It's hard to tell about the look until I get the front on there as well. Get back a bit further. Yeah, it's a bit hard to see. I really need to take it outside, but I think I like how it's come out. If we can stand on top of the Riley. I don't think it's perfectly symmetrical, but then again, the whole car isn't, so I'm not sure anyone's going to notice. Like I say, I need to do a bit more smoothing out on those fillet pieces, and then well, I guess eventually they'll all be painted up and done. Well, that's basically where I'm at with that. The only other small thing I've done is paint the front axle for the Riley, and it's kind of a measure of how good the steel is in these old cars, but and that'll sit there and ring like that for quite a long time. But I think that's enough old car bashing for the day. I think I'm going to go and have a beer. One very quick addition to this. One, sorry if I repeat myself in these films, because I'm making them bit by bit, and often it's at the end of a long day when I'm basically knackered, and so I forget what I've said. But what I was going to add on this one is one of the things I may look at doing is where those bolts come through. It always worries me just bolting things straight through to the aluminium skin like that. So I'm actually thinking of lining the inside of the boot there with something like this thin sort of plywood, maybe 3mm thick ply, something like that. Because what I'm thinking is if I cut out panels of ply to go in there, to fit up against the aluminium, then the screw heads aren't touching the aluminium. They're going to have to pass through it, but I'm always worried about corrosion between the steel and the aluminium body. That's why you try to separate them as much as possible. Two, with the exposed aluminium sides of the boot like this, anything you have inside the boot that rattles around and slides is going to ding the outer skin. That's obviously not so much of a problem now because I've got these that cover most of that. But for the rest of it, it would probably be good to have some sort of lining on the inside of the boot. And I'm thinking 3mm ply, something like that, that then gets held underneath those bolts, would basically finish that off nicely. So it'll give me the plywood lining on the inside of the boot. I'll have to make another piece to go up in there. It keeps the bolt heads off the aluminium, and it just spreads the load out a bit more as well. So if anything happens, if there's any sort of stresses on these guards or things are flexing, which, well, you can see they're not. That's not even with all the bolts actually done up fully to full tightness. But it'll just help spread the load out and might be a nice neat finish for the inside of the boot there.